we will be sitting down with T3 Expo, a general contractor for live events that is now helping make hospital rooms and beds to help test and treat coronavirus patients. I don't want to waste any more time. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Chris Valentine, Kyle Spolski, and Tim Heffernan. Hi, you guys. How are you?
Hi, Kendall. How are you?
Hi, Kendall.
Hanging in there. Appreciate you guys jumping on during what's a very busy time, and especially with everything that you've got going on. I know I gave a brief introduction of T3 Expo, but before we get into this more, I'd love for one of you to give kind of a detailed insight into what you guys do and what the company is.
Sure, I'll jump in. T3 Expo supports brands and associations within regard to their live events. So essentially, we think about it's the physical manifestation of our customers' brands. Brands such as yours, NetSuite, Amazon, Workday, as well as associations such as the Toy Show, American Foot and Ankle Surgeons, and college bookstores.
Yeah, you basically got to my next question there, which was how does T3 and NetSuite work together? You touched on it, but I'll let you go into deeper detail there.
Sure. Well, we're a customer as well. So we work with, I work with NetSuite every day as a software, but we support SuiteWorld. We have, I think this is our 7th year or 8th year, supporting SuiteWorld through the design, the builds, and the manifestation of your brand.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that insight. Now, with that being said, as all of our audience knows, SuiteWorld was postponed, and I'm guessing that has been the case for most, if not all, of your events as of late. Events are made to happen in person, and although we're living in a virtual world right now, how has the current climate impacted your business, not only to quickly shift, but also to, give back?
Yep. Well, it's unprecedented. The event industry was at one of its highest points historically, and quite literally has gone to zero in a matter of weeks. Never has that happened in any industry in the history of the United States. Like, obviously, hotels, restaurants are severely impacted, but to go to zero is absolutely crazy. Yeah. So it has forced us to really look at our business, at our customers, employees, and reframe our strategy to make the most of what we have, to pivot to things we can do versus what we can't do, and work our way through this as a community.
Yeah, what would you say has been the biggest hit? There's a different parts of your business, but what would you say has been the biggest hit to the business overall?
Well, it's the cancellation or postponement of shows. Okay. So you're ramped up within a planning period and a production period to execute. When that just stops, you have overhead, people, reallocation of people, resources that you have to reframe.
Right.
So we started very early. When we started to get whispers of this, like almost going on 45 days ago, that it was starting to spread through Europe, and we started to make plans through 30-day phases that carry us all the way through the end of the year. And then executing that plan with all our stakeholders, our employees, once again, and our customers, to make sure we're aligned.
What has been your strategy in terms of communicating with your clients since all of this started? And how have you gone about some of those postponements and cancellations?
Yeah, so this is Tim. Like, one of the things that we've done with our clients is that we wanted to make sure that, we have the long view with our clients. So what we've done is that it's like, look, we're not going to, be punitive at all. We're going to look at like, what's the work that actually has occurred, figure out what the right pricing model is for what has happened. And then take any type of, deposits or work that can be pushed into next year, and either give them the, the option, if it's a deposit of what we can return, we'll return, or if they want it, like one client, they actually wanted to put it towards 2021. So I think, part of our culture and our DNA is to be very flexible with our clients and making sure that we're not punitive, but also, like your hashtag says, we're open for business. So one of the things that this has actually become a really good time for a lot of our clients to say, hey, look, you know, those things that you always say, I wish I just had the time to do, or rethink this, or what's a different type of floor plan, or can we explore a couple different creative avenues? That's really been something that we've been able to do with a lot of our clients, because like Chris said earlier, you know, we haven't closed our doors. We have not, you know, just done, you know, across the board furloughs. You know, we really want to say, okay, how do we stay open for business? How do we utilize this time in the best way to help businesses in terms of when we come out the other end of this? You know, how is business going to change? What does that mean for those individual clients? And how can we showcase, as obviously people start to rethink about what events they go to, that you make sure that you're that destination event that people say, yes, you know what, I am going to travel for that. I do think it's worth my time and my expense, you know. And so when we talk about that, and it's more, you know, more relevant than ever, is shareable moments. So what, you know, why are people leaving their house? Why are people leaving their families? Why are people leaving their place of work? Why are you taking that time and investment to go to a physical event, right? It's because you can't get that someplace else. You can't just search it online. You can't, you know, I mean, this is great, this virtual world, but, you know, those takeaways, those conversations that you have, those in-person meetings, that's something that's just part of our human existence. And I think that's what, you know, we try to bring to life.
So that's kind of on, you know, what you're saying for these clients of yours that they can do and really focus this time on doing is rethinking how they can make these events the best they can be. What about on the T3 side? I mean, how are you guys adapting to this while things during these cancellations, when you don't have, during this zero, you know, event period? What are you guys doing?
Well, we've pivoted to help out in any way we can. You touched upon this, right? By building temporary hospitals, essentially,
Wow.
and supporting FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers in building these structures and these facilities out.
Yeah.
We've also supported by making temporary beds. It's the pivot, right? It's almost like a wartime mentality. What do you have? What do you have? And how do you use that in the current incarnation of what the environment is? And so that's approaching everything. We've had a conversation today with our bank, and we started asking across their entire portfolio, who needs help? Not only navigating the situation, but who needs help and who is busy and could use some of the assets we have and some of the human capital we have to support them.
Yeah. So is that kind of what actually, let me reverse. What was the impetus for, you know, shifting to building hospital rooms in bed? I mean, where did this light bulb go off just from the beginning? Was this from asking partners, or did this kind of just happen? You guys were like, well, this is going to need people. We're going to need this. So let's just start going.
Yep. So it was a confluence. It happened very quickly. Obviously, New York from the get-go being one of the largest metropolitan areas, and now with a lot of infections, we reached out and started talking to the Javits really early. And within 24 hours, it all started to come together. We made the inquiry. Javits was called upon. The Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA came in, and that was on a Saturday. By the end of the day on Saturday, we had given them floor plans, initial designs, pricing, and a preliminary production plan. By Monday afternoon, we were mobilizing equipment from various warehouses, and by Wednesday morning, we were building, and by Thursday afternoon had built 500 rooms.
Oh my gosh. That, I mean, first of all, I just want to take a second to applaud you guys for that, because I mean, as I'm not obviously in New York, I'm in Los Angeles, but I know the need. A lot of friends are doctors and nurses and talking about it, and just thank you for moving as fast as you moved and helping to do that. That is incredible, truly incredible.
Thank you.
But Kendall, I just want to circle back to one thing you said before in terms of that, of what every customer can do in that situation. Not obviously every customer can build hospitals, but it's how that happened was that what we started to do was like everyone call your 3 to 5 closest kind of customers and contacts that you talk to on a weekly basis, and just first reach out to see how they're doing, right? In a genuine human way, not in a like, you know, what can you, you know, not a salesy way. But then the other one is like, well, what are you working on right now? If it's nothing, can I, is there anything you need help with in terms of you, your family, your friends, that type of stuff? And then say, those are actually where a lot of our conversations have come from, frankly, has been around, what are you trying to solve for right now? And like literally it has nothing to do with our business, but a friend who's a commander in the US Navy, had another friend that had PPE equipment. And so I hooked them up with someone in the city of New York so they could buy PPE equipment. It's those types of conversations that I think are going to, define this moment and define hopefully how we kind of move forward together, that it's not just about, what I can do for you, you can do for me, but we can do for each other. And that's kind of how we're looking at this. And those conversations are what led to, the Javits.
Wow. So it's really, I mean, you guys are working with so many businesses all over the place that it's really a matter of connecting the dots between businesses, connecting the dots between your networks and seeing where, not just you guys, but where your clients can be useful for someone else.
Exactly.
I love that. Really, really solid piece of insight. Kind of back, I want to round out just how you guys went about being able to make hospital beds and hospital rooms, for a company that was making event spaces and building out expo floors. Have you had any issues in terms of, you were saying like I think you said by Monday you were starting to get the supplies and resources you need. Have you had any issues obtaining those supplies and resources with the delays we're seeing in shipping and so on and so forth?
We were fortunate enough to align everybody very quickly, but it was something we had to be keenly aware of because this is not normal type of supply chain in any aspect, right? Between PPP equipment as well as building 1,000 rooms in a couple of days. So you have to be really in tune with your vendors, who you're sourcing from, right down to shipping. I mean, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, there was restrictions on some trucking.
Yeah.
So a lot of communication and going over things 2 or 3 times just to make sure we're aligned and the timeframes are aligned.
And where does visibility come into play as you're forced to adapt and shift your supply chain and everything else around in such a quick period of time? I mean, how did you have the confidence to do that?
It's understanding who to go to and when quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It's relying on the people that you support as well as who support you to make sure when you ask the right questions, the right information is being given back to you.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, once we kind of aligned those parts, putting the hospital in wasn't too dissimilar from doing a trade show. It had a lot of the same tempo. Structurally, you had to be very agile. So one of the things that didn't come out first was signage. They were moving so quick, they never addressed how they were going to identify the hospital rooms, excuse me. So that came in very late. We had to produce 1,000 different ID signs so people would know where to go. But that type of fluidity is something we're very used to when you're doing any event.
Yeah, yeah. Can you just walk us through, I mean, I'm guessing the way that you're measuring success, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing the way you're measuring success is how many beds you're able to make, how many different companies you're able to help. But how are you measuring this? And B, can you walk us through some of those success stories, some of the areas I saw the other day you guys posted on your Facebook out of Connecticut? Yeah. Can you walk us through some of that?
So we'll talk about the Connecticut job. So that came in that they wanted 700 beds. The design came from Gilman Brothers, who is a manufacturer, supplier of graphics materials out of Connecticut. They were supplying the materials. Now, this is when the supply chain issue comes in. It needed 4,000 4x8 sheets to be cut. That's not a normal demand and something they keep on the floor, right? So they had to shift their entire manufacturing process in very short order to kind of feed us. So we had to work in unison as we cut and produced the beds that they were feeding us the material at the same rate in order to hit a deadline of 48 hours to do it. So success is delivering the 700 beds in 48 hours because there's a whole nother section that has to happen when they delivered those to Western Connecticut State University, because there was a lot of people from FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers to put these beds together. So
Right.
success is we deliver that on time. It's ready to go. And then the medical staff can start prepping it to actually start accepting patients. But it's very similar if you think about an event. We have to get in there first. We have to start building the infrastructure. And then you start bringing attendees in, and then you have the actual event. So it's very similar that way.
Wow. Well, that's just incredible. The way that you guys, again, are just able to turn on a dime and make this happen is it's truly inspiring. As far as managing the workforce that is helping make all of this happen, how are you keeping those employees who are working on these projects safe at this time? And how are you managing that type of internal communication to ensure that they're following the right practices and that they're, you know, again, just staying safe in what's a pretty, you know, obviously dangerous time?
Yeah. I mean, we're down to very few people in the office. I mean, there's like 4 people in the office and 4 people in production.
Mm-hmm.
So we made sure that, you know, you're getting close on occasion, but it's still a pretty big space.
Mm-hmm.
So social distancing is pretty consistent. We also made sure that people who are coming in were of lower risk, and it was voluntary. So working in our warehouse to produce these materials. And then we had 3 people at the Javits Center when we were actually putting in the hospital rooms. Most of the labor, all the labor comes from the Javits Center. We had to manage it, and that's in normal form. But those 3 gentlemen actually ended up having to be self-quarantined for 14 days. That's the law coming out in New York right now. So they're just about at the end right now, and they're healthy, which is good. But every day when they went into the Javits, every worker got their temperature taken and had like a really quick exam to make sure that, you know, they weren't showing any symptoms. They also used gloves and masks while they were building in the Javits Center. And actually, as of today or yesterday, I think all non-essential workers are out of the Javits Center. It's only healthcare professionals at this point.
Wow. So, you know, we have our healthcare professionals that are on the front lines, but I mean, your own employees are raising their hands, volunteering, and putting themselves.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think the way our employees have reacted through all this, when we started T3 in 2009, the first thing myself, Nate Derby, and Chris Young, my 2 other founders, did is we came up with a list of values, what we wanted to be built on. And we always talk about our values. And, you know, when you have a list of values, it's really easy to say, well, you know, this is how we work in really good times. But it's when you're going through really challenging times, both personally, professionally, that you have to rely on those values. And I have to say that the team that I have, that I'm on, is amazing. They constantly stand up and will do whatever is needed, especially in these times. And what we say inside our organization is getting through this is all about your team. And I tell everybody that I like my chances because I have a great team.
Yeah. That's, again, good takeaways for not just this time, but for every, you know, business leader and for every, you know, every company, no matter what stage you're at. Really solid insight. And that is one of my questions, but what is your leadership strategy through all of this? It's very different than what you're used to doing. So how, Chris, as a leader, how have you had to shift your own strategy to match what's going on right now?
Great question. So first is communication. We have at least once a week company town halls, and then I have a mini town hall with a smaller group of people so they can feel more comfortable asking me questions. And we've been very, very transparent in what we're seeing, what we think is going to happen, and how we're going to get through it. And it's really bound us together and in a unifying way. Even we took pay cuts across the board very early. We've had to do some layoffs, but even going through that, and we continue to communicate with that group of people who were laid off to bring them through it. And we've done the same with our customers. We've done the same thing with our other stakeholders like banks. And we did it early. As soon as we saw it, we started communicating. And it allowed us to kind of set the tempo and set the tone.
Yeah.
And every week we have these meetings and people come back and they're saying, thank you for communicating that with us. I think if there's any advice I would give any other company is we're all in this. It's not like one company's revenue went down, everybody's revenue went down. So don't be afraid to communicate to your employees. Don't be afraid to communicate with your other stakeholders like banks. It goes a long way, and people are living this.
Yeah.
You don't always have to give people the best news, but you have to be really honest with them.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to the cash flow side of things. You just said you guys are at 0 events.
Yep.
And yet you're able to retain some employees, and you were able to make 700, beds in a matter of 5 days or whatever. How are you managing cash flow in order to do this? And then is there any, cuts or containment strategies you've put in place that others can learn from as well?
Yep. So I've been in this business for 25 years. So by far, this is the worst situation from an economic downturn that I've experienced, but it's not the first. And within the context of this business, it's always, even in the best of times, managing your overhead. And one of your largest pieces of overhead is your buildings. And we are contractors. And so we have to build a structure and a system to support our business with kind of a distribution channel and minimizing the amount of buildings we have. And if you, even in the best of times, manage that expense efficiently, when you have to contract, that's immovable. And it lessens the burden on the rest of your organization. So that's how we looked at it. The next step we looked at is we didn't try to solve the entire problem all at once. The first we started solving in 30-day tranches and align our company and our banks in the same way to manage cash flow. So very quickly, we were through a projection is if we went to 0 revenue through July, we were fine. Now, the next stage is working through the CARES Act and make sure that you're aligned with that, with any kind of monies that could come out of that. And that's our next phase. And we'll keep on working this as long as we have to. And being a little bit conservative up front when you're going into it, and then working the plan all the way through. Look, it's hard. There's no easy way. People had to take cuts. People had to take some layoffs. But when we did lay off people, we laid them off early so we could give them a little bit of severance. So we laid them off early in March. We paid them through the end of March, plus we paid their PTO, and then we paid their benefits through June. If you wait to make those decisions until it's really, really hard, you don't have that flexibility. You've already spent that money. But we were able to give people a transition period. And that's how we've been saving on cash flow.
Yeah. Well, that's, again, great insight. And you mentioned we've been asking a lot of, in these interviews that we're doing, both for, Noon with NetSuite, but also some of the interviews we're doing on the side with, companies, we're asking about how they're going about applying for, federal, state, or local funding or industry-specific funding. Tim and I had the opportunity to chat a bit about it. Tim knew a lot, and I'd love for you guys to share any insight you have into those processes, what it takes, and what, again, what advice you'd give to those that are watching right now that are struggling to get through it.
Sure. There's a couple things. One, first, really go back to if you haven't already, and I'm sure people have by now, go through your, original bank that you've worked with and developed a relationship with over the years in business. They have, now the banks have a pretty good information up online about it. If you haven't had a chance to do that yet, or if you're still kind of wondering about it, it's really, it's not frankly that hard to, the way that the loan's structured. So what you have to do is look at it from a loan from 2 standpoints. One, it is a loan. However, it can be completely forgiven if you maintain certain things. So what does that mean in English? It means that you look at your rolling 12 months of payroll, take the average, and then take the average for 1 month, times it by 2.5. That's then include not just payroll, but also your benefits, 401k contributions, basically a fully loaded FTE. That's what you have to think about. Then you times that by 2.5, that's your first number. Then your subsequent numbers you're able to add to that. is your rent and your debt servicing on like a mortgage, or if there was a big piece of equipment you just bought, or if you just did a refurbishment or something, only the debt servicing part of that times up by 4x. That's your total amount that you're basically able to take, ask for. The way that it's forgiven, there's been a lot of confusion, I think, around this, but I think it's pretty simple. If you just think about it as the amount of people that I claimed in that 1 month of salary, you have to basically maintain those people. So if you maintain those people and you use the funds for 75% for that purpose, then your loan's forgiven. And that loan's terms are now set at 1% over a 2-year term. The first 6 months you can defer. The forgiveness part is the part that you have to go back with whoever you take it, whatever banking institution you take it through. There is now on the SBA site a referral engine for different people if their bank isn't getting back to them or if they're having an issue with their bank. There's also other companies that are helping set that up in different trade associations that are helping their members now with those loans. And that's something that we're volunteering, our time with, is to work with our different trade association customers, is saying, look, because we've kind of been knee deep in this legislation, and have helped explain it to others, we're happy to volunteer our time and do the same thing. So Chris, myself, others who have been very intimately involved in going through our own application for this, but we've also spent, I know Chris has as well, up to midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, walking through, friends of friends of friends through this loan process. And now we're going to do that again with our trade association partners. But my basic piece of advice is, A, don't be afraid of it. Go apply for it, and apply quickly, because there is a certain amount of money that's out there. I know that the Treasury Secretary, as well as the President, have come back and said, as well as Senate Leader McConnell have come back and said that they're going to add additional funds to it, because there is such an upswell where people want to access this money. So that's encouraging. But I would just encourage it, people to do this now and look at it the way that Chris did, which is and that we did, as how can I keep my people employed that are going to help me be successful through this and through when we come out of this.
Yeah.
So that's the way I look at it.
Really solid insight. And you're spot on. We've been talking to some people in the restaurant industry who are looking into local funds, and we're admitted they were a little late to the game. And so I think that key advice there in terms of just do it now, get on it.
Do it now.
Yeah, is crucial. Along the same lines, almost everyone has a business continuity plan. Almost none of them will be sufficient for something like this. Did you guys have a plan in place? And if so, what part of it was helpful in this situation?
I did not have a pandemic plan in place.
I don't think
we'll be honest.
If I had, I would have went short in the market or something. We wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But, I think it's all because the closest, like I talked about how we manage our overhead, even in the best of times. And that's just from an experience standpoint of going through 9/11, the tech bubble, the economic downturn of 2008 and 2009, that, events are impacted by the economy. The bad thing is they're usually impacted very early in a change. The good thing is they're very early to come back on board. And I think that was our plan. It's always been our plan to always have the backdrop that there will be a change. And let's be honest, we are at the longest era of prosperity in the United States economic history.
Yeah.
People love to think it's just going to be continuing line forever, but it was going to change. This was extreme. This is quick, but it's not unexpected from that. There was going to be a downturn at some point.
Yeah.
I would just like to add one other things to that, because I think, prevailing wisdom, at least in our industry and others, is that, the ones with the most buildings win, or the most infrastructure. I think that this is an opportunity to reassess how you think about what you value and what actually matters to your customer and their end goals of, providing a product of value to them. And so you just have to start asking yourself, all right, if I've had this many people working from home, do I really need this much office space?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is there an opportunity to kind of do a rolling hoteling of office space, where maybe it's not this open floor plan that I know there's been a lot of negative feedback that people have had over the years, but maybe it's like, well, maybe I can now hotel, my different offices, so that way inside my buildings, and not have a dedicated office that sits vacant 75% of the time. I think it's really about looking at what are the investments I can make now and coming out of this, that we frankly structured the company around, which was being built in the cloud, and not being, centralized on, physical assets. I think it's really the core strengths of companies. I know this is kind of an obvious thing to say, are really its people. So, but what are your core people doing now to help you through this? And how are they really demonstrating that value to their customers? That gives you a good litmus test, I think, in terms of like, who your core team is. What are those values that they can then teach to their core teams? And that's how you get this good cascading effect. Roll that up of what those conversations are from a senior leadership team. And that's what Chris and Kyle and Chris and what we do as a leadership team do. And then be able to federate that back out in terms of your company and your customers. I think that's really how we've been spending time as a management team together and with our customers. And I think that's something that every business can do right now. Really reassess where you're making those both, monetary investments, but frankly, how are you investing your time?
Yeah, and that is, one of we're going to conclude here in the next few, but one of my questions for everyone, but also, especially for you guys, is what changes have you made to cope with all of this that you'll consider keeping permanently now, as you're discussing the future?
Go ahead, Tim, if you want to start.
Sure. Well, I think I just touched, the change that we're really looking at in the future is that how are you really engaging with your customer? So beyond, kind of the day-to-day work that we all do and the status meetings and kind of those rolling weekly conference calls, which are, are important to keep the kind of momentum in business going. But is there an opportunity to kind of change the conversation and how you're prioritizing, that time and what you're working on? And really being able to connect with people, I think, on a, not just in a transactional way, which is part of, our culture has never been that way. But I think that's where people are succeeding right now, is when they're no longer, and I'm sure we've all seen it, right? I think the best example is when you still get occasional emails from companies that are kind of like business as usual, and they're trying to sell you something, and you're like, really? Have you not like looked at what's going on in the world? And I, don't need a sale on this right now, or don't please try to do a demand gen thing to me right now in terms of the traditional way. Mm-hmm. I think that if we can hold, that type of empathy and personalization that really matters to an end customer and federate that through our organization and through our whole lives, I think that would be a thing that I'd like to hold on to through this.
Yeah, the only thing, this is Kyle, the only thing that I'd add to that too, it's part of an angle stemming from our culture, right? We view our relationships with our customers as relationships, not, just merely transactional. And so, as well as applying learning that Tim's talking about, it's continuing to do the things that are working and getting a good response and strengthening those relationships. At times like this, people tend to spend time with the people they trust. And so it's an opportunity to continue to build that trust. And so everything we talked about earlier with regard to how we're communicating with our customers, we're communicating every day, but we're not stopping the work on their projects in the fall, because we're all hopeful when whatever the new normal is, when it comes back, that there will be events and we'll all congregate and it'll all be successful. So, that's really where we're doubling down on our bet as well, is to just continue building out those relationships and see how they can blossom regardless of the business challenge, whether event related or not.
Yeah. Great insight. Chris, anything you'd add?
I guess internally, the way I look at it, it's a little bit ironic. When you build a company from the start, oftentimes, there's no giant book in the back and says, this is what you should do next. And you look backwards and you often say, I would do this differently. And I think everybody in our organization kind of looks at this as an ability and an opportunity to change the things we always want to change to be better. Mm. That's the way we should look at it. There's always an opportunity in these situations to innovate, to change and evolve. And history tells us that. I mean, I've taken a lot of inspiration from Churchill at the beginning of World War II, and kind of how he had to deal with a kind of similar situation, right? He didn't have an army. The Germans were coming very close to invading England, and he had to rethink the problem in a quick way. And it carried him, but he was also really innovative, honest with the people of England, and move forward. And that's the way we look at it. This is an opportunity to be better. And everybody should really look at it. It's an opportunity for you to be better. It doesn't mean that it's not hard to get through what you have to get through today, but we will get through it as a country, as a world, as a company. This will end. We just don't know when. So everything you should do is about buying time, how you communicate with your customers, how you make cuts, how you communicate with your employees. It's all about buying time, because this will come to an end. We've been dealing it with our company for 45 days. That's 45 less days that we have to deal with it going forward. And we know we will push forward and we will get through it and we will be better. And everybody, you kind of need to take that attitude. And that's how you get better through it. And that's the ironic opportunity within all of this.
I mean, on that note, I just can't say thank you enough for joining us. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for the incredibly useful insight that I know everybody who's watching, whether you're a business leader or an employee, anyone can take that and utilize that and put it in their back pocket for, you know, the rainy days when we're feeling like, oh man, I don't know that I can do this another day. That right there is what we need. More leaders like you. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.